If you want this to hit like a viral sports documentary opening, you don't start with statistics, you start with a warning. Because what happened in Indiana isn't just roster building, it's a declaration of war disguised as a basketball rebuild. The moment the Indiana Fever front office stopped reacting and started constructing, everything shifted. For 2 straight seasons, Caitlin Clark walked into arenas as a generational spotlight, and at the same time, she became the most physically scrutinized rookie presence the league had seen in years. Every hard contest became a debate, every collision became a replay loop, and every foul, fair or excessive, turned into fuel for a bigger conversation about how far competition can stretch before it becomes something else entirely. Critics pointed at numbers, supporters pointed at intent, and somewhere in the middle lived a reality that no box score can fully explain. A franchise player absorbing contact at a rate that sparked league-wide arguments about protection, fairness, and responsibility. And Indiana? They watched it all unfold. They didn't just see a star putting up numbers, they saw a franchise asset taking hits, literally and figuratively, while the surrounding structure failed to consistently absorb pressure with her. That's where everything changed. The Fever didn't respond with speeches. They responded with construction. They didn't just add players, they added identity. Sophie Cunningham enters that picture like a switch being flipped. Not just a shooter, not just a veteran guard, but a player whose entire reputation has been built around physical presence, edge, and refusal to be intimidated. Alongside her, Myisha Hines-Allen brings championship experience and a bruising front-court mentality forged through years of playoff-level basketball, while Tyasha Harris adds something quieter but just as important: control, stability, and relief for a system that previously asked one player to carry too much for too long. When you put those pieces together, it stops being a normal roster and starts looking like a message. And that message is simple: the floor around Caitlin Clark is no longer passive. It reacts. It absorbs. It answers. Every team that thought Indiana could be pushed around now has to reconsider what stepping into that paint actually costs. Because this isn't just about offense anymore, it's about response. It's about presence. It's about a team that no longer watches its star get isolated without consequence. And that's why the conversation shifted so aggressively into 2026 expectations. Not because Indiana suddenly became flawless, but because they finally addressed the one thing that separated them from true contention: physical identity. You can debate fouls, you can debate officiating interpretations, you can debate intent, but you can't ignore the fact that Indiana built a roster specifically designed to make every possession feel heavier, more contested, and far less comfortable for anyone trying to test their franchise cornerstone. That's the foundation of this entire transformation. And whether you agree with the narrative or not, the league is now facing a version of Indiana that no longer plays like it's waiting for permission to compete physically. It responds immediately, and it responds together. Now zoom into what that actually means on the court, because this is where the shift becomes impossible to ignore. The Fever aren't just tougher, they're structurally different in how pressure is distributed. In previous seasons, Caitlin Clark carried not only the offensive creation load but also absorbed defensive attention that often spiraled into physical contact stretches where Indiana had no consistent counterbalance. That imbalance created fatigue patterns, inconsistency in late-game execution, and roster dependency that exposed itself whenever rotations shortened. The 2026 construction attempts to dismantle that entirely. Sophie Cunningham isn't just spacing the floor, she's changing how defenders behave off-ball because she brings a reputation that forces hesitation in physical matchups. Myisha Hines-Allen isn't just rebounding, she's anchoring possessions that previously ended in second-chance opportunities for opponents. Tyasha Harris isn't just a backup guard, she's workload insurance, allowing Indiana to avoid overextending their primary creator in games that used to demand everything from her, every single night. And when those layers stack together, the entire geometry of the team changes. Defenses can't collapse freely anymore because the perimeter is no longer passive. The paint isn't a soft landing zone anymore because there's size, strength, and willingness to contest every touch. Even rotations become more complicated for opponents because there are fewer safe matchups to exploit. And that's before you even factor in the psychological layer, the reputation shift. Teams that once viewed Indiana as a finesse-heavy offense now have to account for retaliation energy, controlled aggression, and a refusal to be physically overwhelmed without response. That alone changes scouting reports. That alone changes game planning. And that alone changes how possessions begin. But the real weight of this transformation isn't just in personnel, it's in intention. Indiana didn't stumble into toughness. They selected it. They prioritized it. They built around the idea that protecting a franchise player isn't just about schemes or help defense, it's about having multiple players on the floor who can immediately shift the tone of contact. That doesn't eliminate controversy, and it doesn't erase debate around physicality in the league, but it does something more immediate. It removes the feeling of helplessness that defined earlier stretches of Indiana's recent seasons. Now every drive has support. Every collision has backup. Every moment of escalation has an answer waiting on the floor. And that's the real evolution heading into 2026. Not perfection. Not dominance guaranteed. But structure that finally matches ambition. A roster that no longer hopes things go smoothly, but instead is built to make sure they don't fall apart when things get rough. And in a league as competitive and physically intense as the WNBA, that shift alone can turn close games into wins, and wins into statements. And the ripple effect of that transformation doesn't stay inside Indiana's locker room, it spreads outward like pressure building under glass. Because the moment a franchise decides it is no longer going to be physically outmatched, the entire league has to recalibrate how it approaches them. Opponents don't just prepare for plays anymore, they prepare for resistance. The scouting reports stop being purely tactical and start becoming psychological. How do you contain a player like Caitlin Clark when she has space? How do you disrupt her rhythm when she's protected by a system that no longer collapses under contact? And more importantly, how do you test Indiana physically without triggering a response that now comes from multiple directions instead of one? That's the shift nobody can ignore. The Fever are no longer built around a single point of failure. They are built around layered accountability. Every possession now carries consequence beyond the ball handler. Every drive is shadowed by help that doesn't arrive late or react slowly, but instead arrives with intent. And that changes how opponents initiate contact, how they attack mismatches, and even how aggressively they pursue transition opportunities. Because for the first time in a long time, Indiana doesn't look like a team waiting to absorb impact, they look like a team prepared to return it in real time, possession after possession, without hesitation. Players hesitate for half a second longer. Drives become slightly less direct. Post-ups are reconsidered mid-action. Not because Indiana has become reckless, but because they've become unpredictable in how force is answered. That unpredictability is what transforms a roster from competitive into feared. And fear in professional basketball doesn't always show itself through confrontation. It shows up in hesitation, in altered angles, in missed aggressions that used to feel automatic. Indiana has moved into that space where teams can no longer assume softness anywhere on the floor. Every matchup now carries the possibility of escalation, not uncontrolled, but contained, disciplined, and backed by personnel who are comfortable operating in that intensity without losing structure. That is the difference between a team that gets pushed around and a team that dictates how physical the game is allowed to become. And as that identity hardens, so does the conversation around what Indiana actually is, not a collection of talent waiting to mature, but a system deliberately engineered to survive and respond in environments that previously exposed them.